Captain Maya Harrington pressed her face against the rain-streaked window of the supply hangar, watching the sleek Black Hawks return from another combat mission she'd never be allowed to fly. Thunder rolled across Forward Operating Base, Echo, as the storm that had been brewing all day finally unleashed its fury. Inside the hangar, boxes of MREs and medical supplies sat stacked in neat rows, her cargo for tomorrow's routine supply run to the rear base. Another exciting day in paradise, huh, Captain? Sergeant Danny Rodriguez called out from behind a wall of ammunition crates. The young supply clerk had been trying to lighten her mood for weeks, ever since she'd been reassigned to logistics. Duty. Maya forced a smile. Living the dream, Rodriguez. But her eyes remained fixed on the combat helicopters. She knew every rivet, every system, every capability of those aircraft. 2 years ago, she would have been in one of those cockpits, not stuck here counting inventory and flying milk runs. 2 years ago, before Kandahar, before everything changed. The hangar door burst open, and Colonel James Patterson strode in. His uniform somehow still crisp despite the downpour. Behind him walked Major Kevin Phillips, the base operations officer, and Lieutenant Colonel David Ramsey, whose permanent scowl seemed even deeper than usual in the fluorescent lighting. Harrington. Patterson's voice cut through the ambient noise of the storm. Weather report, now. Maya straightened to attention. Sir, current conditions show severe thunderstorm activity with winds gusting to 45 knots. Visibility less than half a mile. The storm system is expected to intensify over the next 6 hours. Perfect, Ramsey muttered under his breath. Just perfect. Phillips stepped forward, studying a tablet in his hands. Captain, you've been monitoring the weather patterns in the Helmand Valley sector, correct? Yes, sir. I file reports every 12 hours as required for supply operations. Patterson's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Your reports, Captain. Do they include tactical assessments of flight conditions through the mountain passes? Maya hesitated. It was a trap question, and she knew it. After Kandahar, she wasn't supposed to be thinking tactically. She was supposed to fly cargo, file weather reports, and keep her mouth shut about anything beyond her narrow scope of duties. Sir, I report conditions as observed. If there are tactical implications, that would be outside my current area of responsibility. Good answer, Patterson said, but his tone suggested it wasn't. Because as I recall, Captain, making tactical assessments beyond your assigned duties is what got you into trouble before. The hangar fell silent, except for the drumming of rain on the metal roof. Rodriguez had stopped moving behind the crates, clearly sensing the tension. Maya felt her cheeks burn, but she kept her expression neutral. Yes, sir. Understood. Major. Phillips glanced between Patterson and Maya, something unreadable in his expression. Colonel, if I may, the weather intelligence Captain Harrington provides has been exceptionally detailed. More so than we typically receive from logistics personnel. Patterson's eyes never left Maya's face. Is that so? And how would you explain? That level of detail, Captain? Another trap. Maya chose her words carefully. Sir, I believe in thorough reporting. Weather conditions can change rapidly in this region, and accurate information saves lives. Saves lives, Ramsey repeated with a bitter laugh. That's rich, coming from someone who nearly caused an international incident. Maya's hands clenched into fists at her sides, but she remained at attention. Sir, I was cleared of all wrongdoing in that incident. Cleared, yes, Patterson said slowly, but not commended. There's a difference, Captain. A significant difference. The radio on Phillips' belt crackled to life, breaking the uncomfortable silence. Base Ops, this is Overwatch. We have a developing situation in Sector 7. Alpha Team is requesting immediate extraction. Phillips lifted the radio. This is Base Ops. Stand by, Overwatch. He looked at Patterson. Sir, Alpha Team went out this morning on a reconnaissance mission. They were supposed to be back before the storm hit. Patterson moved to the tactical display mounted on the hangar wall, which showed the positions of various units across their area of operations. A red blinking dot indicated Alpha Team's last known location, deep in the mountains where the storm was hitting hardest. What's their status? Patterson asked. Phillips coordinated with the radio operator. After several minutes of back and forth communication, his expression grew grim. Sir, Alpha Team reports they're pinned down by enemy fire. They have casualties and are requesting immediate extraction. The problem is no pilot in their right mind would fly in this weather, Ramsey finished. Especially not through those mountain passes at night. Maya stepped forward slightly. Sir, if I may. You may not. Patterson cut her off sharply. This is not a supply run, Captain. This is combat operations. But Maya had already seen the tactical display. She knew those mountains, knew the weather patterns, knew the narrow corridors where an experienced pilot might be able to thread a helicopter through the storm. She also knew that Alpha Team's position was less than 10 kilometers from another location that had been haunting her thoughts for months. Sir, she said, her voice steady despite the racing of her heart, I know that terrain. Patterson turned to face her fully, his expression dangerous. Captain Harrington, you seem to be under the impression that your opinion matters in this situation. Let me clarify. It doesn't. You are a logistics officer. You fly supply runs. You do not participate in tactical operations. You do not offer unsolicited advice. And you certainly do not volunteer for missions beyond your extremely limited scope of responsibility. The words hit like physical blows, each one carefully, chosen to remind her of her place, of how far she'd fallen. Maya felt Rodriguez watching from behind the supply crates, felt the weight of her reduced circumstances settling on her shoulders like a familiar burden. Yes, sir, she said quietly. Understood. Excellent. Patterson turned back to the tactical display. Phillips, get me Lieutenant Colonel Harris on the radio. We need to coordinate with the combat aviation unit. As the officers moved away to plan the rescue operation that she would not be part of, Maya returned to her inventory duties. But her eyes kept drifting to the tactical display, to the red dot marking Alpha Team's position, and to the vast expanse of terrain beyond it where satellite imagery had shown structures that weren't supposed to exist. Rodriguez approached cautiously. Captain, you okay? Maya looked up from the supply manifest she'd been staring at without reading. I'm fine, Sergeant. That was harsh, what the colonel said. It was accurate, Maya replied, but her voice carried a bitter edge. I made my choices. This is the consequence. Still seems unfair. I've heard the stories about what really happened in Kandahar. About how you... Rodriguez, Maya interrupted, her voice sharp. Some stories are better left untold. The young sergeant nodded and retreated, but Maya caught him glancing at her with something that looked like respect mixed with curiosity. She wondered what stories he'd heard, and how close they came to the truth. Outside, the storm continued to rage, and somewhere in those mountains, 23 American soldiers were waiting for a rescue that might never come. Maya closed her eyes and tried to push away the familiar ache of being grounded, of being sidelined, of being forced to watch from the sidelines while others faced the dangers she'd once taken in stride. But as she returned to counting medical supplies, her mind was already working through flight paths and weather patterns, calculating risks and possibilities. Some habits, it seemed, were harder to break than others. The rain drummed against the hangar roof like machine gun fire, and Maya Harrington counted inventory while her heart counted the minutes until Alpha Team would be beyond any hope of rescue. The command center buzzed with urgent activity as Maya delivered her evening weather report. Officers huddled around the tactical display, their faces grim in the blue glow of the monitors. The storm had intensified, and Alpha Team's situation was deteriorating rapidly. Wind speeds now at 55 knots, Maya reported to the duty officer, Lieutenant Commander Sarah Davis. Visibility down to 200 meters. The storm front is stalled over the mountain passes. Davis nodded absently, her attention focused on the radio chatter filling the room. Copy that, Captain. Thanks. Maya should have left then. Her duty was complete, her report filed. But something in the tense atmosphere kept her rooted in place, and when Colonel Patterson's voice cut through the noise, she found herself listening despite herself. That's the third helicopter we've lost to ground fire, Patterson was saying to Major Phillips. 3 of our best pilots gone, and Alpha Team is still out there. Sir, Phillips replied, studying the tactical display, the enemy has had time to reinforce their positions. Every approach to Alpha Team's location is now covered by anti-aircraft fire. It's a killing field. Lieutenant Colonel Ramsey leaned over the display, tracing possible flight paths with his finger. What about a night approach? Low altitude, using the ridge lines for cover? Negative. Phillips shook his head. The weather makes night flying through those passes suicide. We can't even get a UAV through this storm. Maya moved closer, pretending to organize some paperwork while listening to the conversation. On the tactical display, she could see Alpha Team's position, a small clearing surrounded by enemy forces, with no viable landing zone within miles. We need to face facts, Ramsey said grimly. Alpha Team is beyond our reach. We should start preparing casualty notifications. 23 men, Patterson said quietly. 23 good soldiers. That's when Maya noticed Captain Thomas Reeves' photo on the personnel board, Alpha Team's leader. She'd known Tom since flight school, had served with him on 2 deployments. Before Kandahar, the sight of his face, smiling in his official portrait, made her chest tighten with an emotion she'd tried to keep buried. Sir, she said, stepping forward despite every instinct telling her to stay silent. I could get them out. The room fell silent. All eyes turned to her, and Maya felt the familiar weight of judgment and skepticism. Patterson's expression darkened immediately. Captain Harrington, this is a closed briefing. You have no business being here. I was delivering the weather report, sir. But I know those mountains, and I know there's a way through. Major Phillips frowned. Captain, we've analyzed every possible approach. The risk assessment shows. The risk assessment doesn't account for the thermal updrafts along the eastern ridge, Maya interrupted, moving to the tactical display. The storm creates a narrow corridor here, where the wind patterns would actually provide lift instead of turbulence. Ramsey scoffed. That's theoretical meteorology, Captain. Not tactical flying. It's both, Maya replied firmly. I've studied those weather patterns for months. I know how they interact with the terrain. Patterson stepped closer, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Captain, your last attempt at creative flying resulted in your demotion to supply runs. Do I need to remind you why you're not cleared for combat operations? The accusation hung in the air like a physical presence. Maya felt her face flush, but she forced herself to maintain eye contact. Sir, with respect, this isn't about my past. This is about 23 Americans who need help. It's about a pilot who disobeyed direct orders and nearly caused an international incident, Ramsey added. A pilot who clearly hasn't learned her lesson about staying in her lane. Maya's hands trembled slightly, but her voice remained steady. I made mistakes in Kandahar, sir, but I also saved lives. I can save these lives too. Phillips looked between Maya and the tactical display, something shifting in his expression. What exactly are you proposing, Captain? The supply transport that came in yesterday, Maya said, pointing to the helicopter manifest on the nearby desk. It's older, but it's got the range and the lift capacity. More importantly, it's got manual flight controls that won't be affected by the electronic countermeasures the enemy is using. Patterson's laugh was harsh and bitter. That bucket of bolts? It barely passed inspection. You want to fly a 30-year-old helicopter through the worst storm in months, into a combat zone that's already claimed 3 aircraft? Yes, sir. Absolutely not. Maya felt something break loose inside her chest, a dam of frustration and suppressed purpose that had been building for 2 years. Sir, I'm not asking for permission to be a hero. I'm asking for the chance to do my job. Your job, Patterson said, his voice rising, is flying supply runs. Your job is staying out of trouble and following orders. Your job is accepting the consequences of your past decisions. The words hit home, but Maya absorbed them and kept standing. Around the room, she could see the faces of enlisted personnel who'd stopped their work to listen. Some looked sympathetic. Others seemed to be waiting for her to break down or back down. Colonel Patterson, she said carefully, if you ordered me to attempt this mission, I would follow that order to the best of my ability. But you're not ordering her, Phillips observed quietly. Because if the mission fails, it's on her record, not yours. The comment created a moment of uncomfortable silence. Patterson's jaw worked as he stared at Maya, clearly wrestling with competing impulses. The helicopter you're talking about, he said finally. It's not equipped for combat operations. No countermeasures, no defensive systems. You'd be flying blind into a hornet's nest. I know, sir. The weather conditions are beyond acceptable parameters for any rational pilot. Yes, sir. And if something goes wrong when something goes wrong, you'll be on your own. No backup, no support, no rescue. Maya nodded. Understood, sir. Patterson studied her for a long moment, then turned to Phillips. Major, in your professional opinion, what are the chances of this mission succeeding? Phillips hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the question. Sir, honestly, less than 10%. The weather alone makes it nearly impossible, and that's before factoring in enemy fire. And the chances of Alpha Team surviving without extraction? 0, sir. They won't. Last the night. The math was brutal and simple. Maya watched Patterson process it, saw the moment when desperate hope overrode military caution. This is insane, he muttered, then looked directly at Maya. If I authorize this, and I'm not saying I will, it would be against my better judgment, and contrary to all tactical doctrine. Yes, sir. You would be volunteering for what amounts to a suicide mission. Sir, I've flown worse odds. Ramsey stepped forward, his expression incredulous. Colonel, you cannot be seriously considering this. Captain Harrington's psychological evaluation after Kandahar specifically recommended against high-stress combat situations. Maya felt the familiar sting of having her mental state questioned, but she pushed it aside. Sir, I've completed all required therapy and been cleared for flight duty. My current assignment is administrative, not medical. There's a difference between being cleared to fly cargo and being cleared to fly into a war zone, Patterson said. But something in his voice had changed, as if he was talking himself into a decision rather than out of one. The radio crackled with an incoming transmission. Base Ops, this is Alpha Team. We have multiple casualties. Enemy forces are closing in from 3 sides. Request immediate extraction, over. The voice was Tom Reeves, and Maya could hear the strain and desperation he was trying to hide. In the background, she could make out the sound of gunfire and someone calling for a medic. Patterson closed his eyes briefly, then opened them with the look of a man who'd made an impossible choice. Captain Harrington, you have 15 minutes to prep that aircraft. This is not an order. This is me stepping aside and letting you volunteer for the stupidest mission in military history. Maya felt a surge of adrenaline mixed with terror. Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. "Don't thank me," Patterson said grimly. "If you somehow survive this, we'll probably both be court-martialed. If you don't survive, at least I'll be able to tell Alpha Team's families that we tried everything." As Maya turned to leave, Phillips caught her arm. "Captain, that helicopter, have you actually flown that specific model before?" Maya met his eyes. "No, sir, but I've read the manual." The look on Phillips' face was pure horror, but Maya was already moving toward the door. Behind her, she heard Patterson on the radio. "All units, be advised. We have one aircraft attempting emergency extraction of Alpha Team. All air traffic is to maintain distance from the operational area." As she pushed through the door into the storm, Maya felt the weight of 23 lives settling on her shoulders. In 15 minutes, she would either prove that some things were worth risking everything for, or she would become another casualty of a war that had already taken too much. The rain hit her face like ice water, and for the first time in 2 years, Captain Maya Harrington felt truly alive. The hangar felt different, now charged with purpose instead of resignation. Maya moved through her pre-flight inspection with practiced efficiency, every motion precise despite the tremor in her hands. The old Black Hawk sat before her like a mechanical dinosaur, its olive drab paint chipped and faded, its systems decades behind the sleek combat aircraft she'd once piloted. Chief Warrant Officer Martinez appeared at her shoulder, his weathered face creased with concern. "Captain, I've been maintaining aircraft for 22 years, and I'm telling you this bird isn't meant for what you're planning." Maya ran her hand along the helicopter's flank, feeling for stress fractures in the metal. "What's her service history, Chief?" 3 tours in Iraq, 2 in Afghanistan. She's been shot up, patched up, and probably held together with prayers and duct tape more times than I can count. Martinez gestured to a series of repair patches along the fuselage. "But she's sound, mechanically speaking. Engines solid, rotors are balanced, flight controls are responsive. That's all I need." Martinez shook his head. "Ma'am, what you need is one of those new birds with all the countermeasures and defensive systems. This old girl's got nothing but basic instruments and a prayer." Maya climbed into the cockpit, running through the startup sequence in her mind. The instrument panel looked like something from a museum compared to the high-tech displays she was used to, but the basic controls were familiar. Stick, rudder, collective, the fundamentals that every pilot learned before they ever touched the fancy electronics. "Sometimes the basics are enough," she said, settling into the pilot's seat. "Ma'am," a young voice called from the hangar entrance. Maya looked up to see Private First Class Kevin Dawson, barely old enough to shave, approaching. Hesitantly, "I heard you're going after Alpha Team." "That's right, son." The private swallowed hard. "My brother's with them. Specialist Ryan Dawson. Could you—" He held out a small object, a unit patch with the words, "Death Before Dishonor," embroidered in faded gold thread. "Could you take this, for luck?" Maya took the patch, studying the young man's face. The family resemblance was clear in the set of his jaw, the determined eyes. "I'll bring him home," she said quietly. "Everyone says it's impossible," Kevin whispered. Maya tucked the patch into her flight suit pocket, feeling its weight against her chest. Sometimes impossible just means no one's tried hard enough yet. As she returned to her pre-flight checks, voices carried across the hangar from the entrance. Colonel Patterson had arrived with Major Phillips and Lieutenant Colonel Ramsey, their heated discussion evident even over the sound of the storm. "Completely insane," Ramsey was saying. "Calculated risk," Phillips countered. "Career suicide for all of us," Patterson finished. Maya ignored them, focusing on her instruments. Oil pressure, fuel levels, hydraulic systems, everything checked out within acceptable parameters. The helicopter was old, but she was honest. No hidden problems, no sophisticated systems to fail at the worst possible moment. "Captain Harrington," Patterson's voice cut through her concentration. Final weather report? Maya looked up from the cockpit. Winds are holding steady at 50 knots, gusting to 60. Visibility is down to 100 meters in the passes. Temperature dropping, which means ice formation is possible above 2,000 feet. In other words, conditions are getting worse. Yes, sir. Ramsey stepped forward, his expression grim. Captain, I want to be very clear about something. If you proceed with this mission and it goes wrong, the responsibility is entirely yours. There will be no rescue attempt, no backup, no support of any kind. I understand, sir. Do you? Patterson asked. Because I've been thinking about this, and I realize we're about to send one pilot in an obsolete aircraft into a situation that has already killed 3 crews in modern helicopters. Maya met his gaze steadily. Sir, those crews were following standard tactical approaches. They were predictable, which made them vulnerable. Sometimes the only way through is the way nobody expects. And sometimes the way nobody expects is nobody's way for a good reason, Ramsey countered. Maya was about to respond when her radio crackled with an incoming transmission. Base Ops, this is Alpha Team. Situation is critical. We have wounded who won't survive much longer. If extraction is possible, request immediate assistance. The voice was weaker now, Tom's usual confidence strained by exhaustion and pain. In the background, Maya could hear the distinctive whine of incoming mortar and the sharp crack of rifle fire. Patterson listened to the transmission, his jaw tightening with each word. When it ended, he looked at Maya with something that might have been respect mixed with profound regret. Your call, Captain. But I want it on record that this is against my better judgment. Noted, sir. Maya initiated the startup sequence, feeling the familiar vibration as the rotors began to turn. Chief Martinez, clear the hangar. As the ground crew moved to open the massive hangar doors, Maya felt a familiar calm settle over her. This was the moment she'd been waiting for, not consciously, perhaps, but somewhere deep in her pilot's soul. The moment when training, instinct, and pure determination would either carry her through or destroy her completely. The helicopter lifted off into the storm with a grace that surprised everyone watching. Despite its age and utilitarian design, the old Black Hawk responded to Maya's touch like a thoroughbred, rising smoothly into the violent night sky. Base Ops, this is Harrington. I'm airborne and proceeding to Alpha Team's position. Copy that, Harrington. Godspeed. The storm hit her like a physical wall the moment she cleared the base perimeter. Rain lashed the windscreen so hard it sounded like gravel, and the wind tried to flip the helicopter onto its back. Maya fought the controls, using every ounce of skill and strength to keep the aircraft level and on course. She climbed through the worst of the turbulence, then dropped down, to follow the mountain ridges where the wind patterns were more predictable. The route she'd memorized from studying satellite imagery and weather data led through a series of narrow valleys that would hide her from the worst of the anti-aircraft fire. Come on, girl, she whispered to the helicopter as it bucked and rolled through the mountain passes. Just a little farther. The first ground fire came as she rounded a steep ridge, tracer rounds arcing up through the darkness like deadly fireworks. Maya dropped altitude, skimming the mountainside so close that the rotor wash kicked up clouds of snow and debris. The enemy gunners couldn't depress their weapons enough to target her at this angle, but one lucky shot could still end everything. More fire erupted from a different position, and Maya realized she'd flown into a carefully planned ambush. The enemy had positioned their anti-aircraft weapons to create interlocking fields of fire, making any approach to Alpha Team's position seemingly impossible. But Maya had studied this terrain, had analyzed the weather patterns and elevation changes. She knew there was one approach they wouldn't expect, a narrow canyon that ran almost directly to Alpha Team's location, but required flying below the surrounding peaks in near-zero visibility. She banked sharply into the canyon, the helicopter's rotors almost touching the rock walls on either side. The wind howled between the canyon walls with enough force to flip the aircraft, but it also masked the sound of her approach. For the first time since leaving base, Maya allowed herself to hope. Then she saw Alpha Team's position spread out below her, a small clearing surrounded by enemy forces, with nowhere to land and no way to get close enough for a conventional extraction. But Maya Harrington had never been accused of being conventional. She keyed her radio. "Alpha Team, this is your extraction. Mark your position with whatever light you have. I'm coming in hot." Tom's voice came back, strained but amazed. "Harrington? Is that really you?" "It's me, Tom. Now light up that LZ. We're going home." What happened next would be talked about in military circles for years to come, but in the moment, it was simply a pilot doing what pilots do, finding a way when there doesn't seem to be one, and bringing her people home against all odds. The old Blackhawk descended into hell with Maya Harrington at the controls, and for the first time in 2 years, she felt like she was exactly where she belonged. Maya's helicopter hovered 50 feet above Alpha Team's position, the rotor wash whipping up clouds of dust and debris that provided temporary concealment from enemy fire. Below her, she could see the soldiers huddled in whatever cover they could, find a mix of natural rock formations and hastily constructed defensive positions. "Alpha Team, I count 23 heat signatures," Maya called over the radio, her voice steady despite the chaos erupting around her. "I need you to consolidate at the northern edge of your perimeter. I can't land, but I can hover long enough for you to climb aboard." "Negative, Harrington," Tom's voice came back, tight with pain. "We've got 4 critical casualties who can't move. And there's something else, something you need to know." Maya felt her stomach drop. "What is it, Tom?" "We're not alone out here. There's an installation about 2 clicks north of our position. American personnel are being held there, at least a dozen, maybe more." The words hit Maya like a physical blow. She'd suspected there were off-books operations in this region, had seen the inconsistencies in mission reports and personnel assignments that suggested black site activities. But hearing confirmation made her blood run cold. "How do you know this?" she asked, fighting to keep the helicopter stable in the violent wind. "We intercepted their communications. The facility is called Compound B, and they're holding American operatives who were supposed to be listed as Maya, some of these people have been missing for years." Maya closed her eyes briefly, pieces of a larger puzzle clicking into place. Kandahar, the prisoners she'd been transporting who weren't who they claimed to be, the mission that had destroyed her career and nearly gotten her killed. "Tom, I need to get you and your team out first, then we can know." "No." His voice was firm despite the obvious pain. "Maya, there are kids in that compound. American kids who were recruited and then disappeared into the system. If we leave now, they'll be moved or eliminated." Enemy fire erupted from multiple positions, forcing Maya to shift her hover point to avoid the worst of it. Through her night vision, she could see muzzle flashes from at least 6 different positions, all trained on her aircraft. "Tom, I can't extract both groups. This helicopter doesn't have the capacity or the fuel. Then make 2 trips. Impossible. The enemy knows I'm here now. They'll be ready for a return flight." A long pause filled with static and the sound of gunfire. When Tom spoke again, his voice carried a weight that Maya recognized, the sound of a leader making an impossible decision. "Maya, remember what you told me after Kandahar? About how some things you don't leave behind?" She remembered. It was something she'd said during her debriefing, after she'd been arrested and interrogated for disobeying orders. Something that had been stricken from the official record, but that Tom, as part of the rescue team that had found her, had heard firsthand. I remember. Those people in Compound B, they've been left behind, forgotten, written off as acceptable losses in operations that never officially existed. Maya understood what he was asking, and the magnitude of it staggered her. Not just a rescue mission, but exposure of classified operations that could reach the highest levels of command. The kind of thing that could destroy careers, topple governments, and definitely get her killed. Tom, if we do this, there's no going back. For any of us. I know. More gunfire erupted, this time closer. Maya could see enemy forces moving to flank Alpha Team's position, closing in for what would likely be a final assault. How long can you hold your position? Maybe 20 minutes? Maybe less? Maya made her decision with the same cold calculation. That had carried her through the worst moments of her career. I'm going to Compound B first. I'll extract as many as I can, then come back for you. Maya, that's the plan, Tom. You hold position and stay alive. I'll be back. She pulled up and away from Alpha Team's position, climbing rapidly, to clear the surrounding ridges. Behind her, enemy fire continued to pour into the area where she'd been hovering, but she was already disappearing into the storm. The flight to Compound B took 8 minutes that felt like hours. Maya used the terrain to mask her approach, following valleys and ridge lines that kept her below the enemy's radar coverage. As she approached the coordinates Tom had provided, she could see lights in the darkness, a facility that didn't appear on any official maps. The compound was larger than she'd expected, with multiple buildings surrounded by high walls and guard towers. Intelligence had been wrong about a lot of things, but they'd gotten this right. It was definitely a black site operation. Maya circled the compound once, noting the layout and defensive positions. There were guards, but not as many as she'd expected. Most of the security seemed focused on keeping people in rather than keeping attackers out. She set the helicopter down in a small clearing about 100 meters from the compound's main gate. The landing was rough. She was operating on adrenaline and determination now, her fuel gauge showing levels that made her stomach clench with anxiety. As she shut down the engines, Maya felt the weight of what she was about to do settle on her shoulders. If she was wrong about this compound, if Tom's information was incorrect, she would be committing an act that could be construed as treason. If she was right, she was about to expose operations that powerful people had gone to great lengths to keep hidden. Either way, her career was over. But as she grabbed her sidearm and prepared to leave the cockpit, Maya realized that her career had been over since Kandahar anyway. The only question was whether she would go out quietly, flying supply runs and counting inventory, or whether she would go out fighting for something that mattered. She chose to fight. The rain had intensified, providing cover as she approached the compound's perimeter. The guards were focused on staying dry rather than maintaining vigilant watch, and Maya was able to slip through a gap in the fence that maintenance had clearly been putting off. What she found inside the compound would haunt her for the rest of her life. The first building contained holding cells not to clean, regulated detention facilities used for enemy combatants, but something far worse. Dark, cramped spaces where people who were supposed to be American citizens were being held without charges, without legal representation, without hope. Maya moved through the facility systematically, her training taking over as she cleared each room and documented what she found. Some of the prisoners were military personnel who had been reported as Mia. Others were civilians, contractors, intelligence operatives, even family members who had asked too many questions about missing relatives. In the third building, she found the computer servers and communications equipment that ran the operation. Without hesitation, she began downloading everything she could onto a thumb drive: personnel records, financial documents, communications logs, and most importantly, evidence of who was running the operation and how high up the chain of command it reached. As she worked, Maya heard footsteps in the corridor outside. She palmed her sidearm and waited, but the steps passed by without stopping. The guards were doing routine checks, but they weren't expecting trouble. The download completed just as voices echoed from the main corridor. Maya pocketed the thumb drive and made her way back toward the holding areas, moving quickly but carefully. She had maybe 10 minutes before someone noticed the missing data or the guards realized they had an intruder. The extraction itself was a nightmare of logistics and desperation. 27 prisoners, most of them weakened by months or years of confinement, had to be moved quietly across open ground to a helicopter that was already at the limits of its capacity. Maya made the decision to prioritize the youngest and weakest first, the civilians and the personnel who had been held longest. The military prisoners, despite their own suffering, helped coordinate the movement and provided security. As the last of the extracted prisoners climbed aboard, Maya realized that the helicopter was severely overloaded. The old Black Hawk was rated for 11 passengers plus crew, and she was carrying nearly 30 people. But she'd come this far, and she wasn't leaving anyone behind. The takeoff was one of the most terrifying experiences of her career. The helicopter struggled to gain altitude, wallowing through the air like a wounded whale. Maya coaxed every ounce of power from the engines, using ground effect and thermal updrafts to gradually climb above the surrounding terrain. As they cleared the compound, alarms finally began to sound. Searchlights swept the sky, and Maya could see vehicles moving to intercept their flight path. But she was already disappearing into the storm, using the weather that had nearly killed her as an ally. The flight back to Alpha Team's position was a race against time, fuel, and physics. The overloaded helicopter burned fuel at an alarming rate, and Maya had to make constant adjustments to keep it airborne. Several times, she thought they wouldn't make it, the aircraft shuddering on the edge of a stall that would have killed everyone aboard. But they did make it, arriving at Alpha Team's position just as Tom's voice crackled over the radio with increasing desperation. "Harrington, where are you? We're being overrun." Maya could see the situation had deteriorated dramatically in her absence. Enemy forces had closed to within 50 meters of Alpha Team's position, and muzzle flashes lit up the darkness like a deadly light show. Several of the soldiers she could see weren't moving. "I'm here, Tom, but I've got a problem. I'm carrying too much weight for another extraction." There was a pause filled with gunfire and shouting. When Tom responded, his voice carried the weight of understanding. "How many did you get out?" 27. "Jesus, Maya, the whole compound?" "Everyone I could find." Maya circled the position, trying to find an approach that wouldn't get them all killed. "Tom, I need to set down somewhere and redistribute." "Wait, some of these people are in critical condition. They need medical attention now. There's a flat area about a click east of our position. Natural depression, good cover from 3 sides." Maya found the location and managed a controlled crash landing that was really more crash than landing. As soon as the rotors stopped spinning, she was moving among the extracted prisoners, doing what she could with her limited medical training while Tom's soldiers provided perimeter security. Among the freed prisoners was Captain Derek Hamilton, a pilot who had been reported shot down over Syria 3 years earlier. His eyes held the hollow look of someone who had seen too much, but his voice was steady when he spoke. "Captain Harrington? You're the pilot from Kandahar." Maya looked up from bandaging a civilian contractor's arm. "You know about that? They used you as an example. Told us what happens to pilots who ask too many questions." Hamilton struggled to sit up. "The operation?" "You interrupted. It was just the beginning. What you found tonight, it's part of something much bigger." "How much bigger?" "Facilities in 6 countries. American citizens being held without trial, without charges, without anyone even knowing they exist. Hamilton's voice dropped to a whisper. They're using us for medical experiments, psychological testing, organ harvesting for VIP transplants. Maya felt sick. Who's running it? People with stars on their shoulders and seats in Washington. People who decided that some American lives are more expendable than others. The sound of approaching helicopters cut through the night air. Maya looked up to see searchlights sweeping the ridges around their position. "Tom," she called on her radio. "You seeing this?" Affirmative. Multiple aircraft inbound. They're not ours. Maya made another impossible calculation. The Black Hawk could carry Alpha Team or the extracted prisoners, but not both. And now they had hostile aircraft closing in on their position. "Tom, I need you to make a choice. I can take your team out now, or I can take these civilians, but I can't take both." The radio was silent for a long moment. When Tom finally responded, Maya could hear the pain in his voice. "Take the civilians, Maya. My team signed up for this. They didn't." "Tom, that's an order, Captain. Get those people home." Maya felt tears stinging her eyes. "I'm coming back for you." "I know you." "Well, just make sure this gets out. Make sure people know what's been happening here." Maya lifted off with 27 freed prisoners and a heart full of determination. As she climbed into the storm, she could see the hostile helicopters closing in on Alpha Team's position. Tom and his soldiers were about to make their last stand, and there was nothing she could do to help them. But she could make sure their sacrifice mattered. The flight back to base was a nightmare of fuel calculations and weather navigation. The old Black Hawk was running on fumes and willpower, its engines coughing occasionally in ways that made Maya's blood run cold. Several of the rescued prisoners lost consciousness during the flight, their bodies finally succumbing to months or years of abuse. When Forward Operating Base Echo finally appeared through the storm, Maya had just enough fuel left for one approach. There would be no go-around, no second chances. She had to get it right the first time. The landing was controlled. Chaos. Medical teams swarmed the helicopter before the rotors had stopped spinning, triaging the rescued prisoners and rushing the most critical cases to the field hospital. Maya sat in the cockpit for a moment, her hands shaking with exhaustion and adrenaline. Colonel Patterson appeared at her window, his face a mask of confusion and growing concern. "Captain Harrington, where is Alpha Team?" Maya climbed out of the cockpit and handed him the thumb drive containing the evidence from Compound B. "Sir, Alpha Team is still in the field, but there's something you need to see first. Something that's going to change everything." As medical personnel worked to stabilize the rescued prisoners, Maya found herself standing in the rain outside the command center, watching the storm continue its assault on the mountains where Tom and his soldiers were fighting for their lives. She had kept her promise about not leaving people behind, but the cost of that promise was still being written in blood and gunfire among the dark peaks of Afghanistan. The real battle, Maya realized, was just beginning. The command center had been cleared of all non-essential personnel. Colonel Patterson sat at the head of the conference table, his face pale as he reviewed the contents of Maya's thumb drive. Major Phillips stood behind him, occasionally pointing out specific documents, while Lieutenant Colonel Ramsey paced the room like a caged animal. "This is impossible," Ramsey said for the third time. "These operations ... they don't exist. They can exist." Captain Winters, the base intelligence officer, looked up from her laptop where she'd been cross-referencing the prisoner identities. "Sir, I've confirmed the identities of 18 of the rescued individuals. They match missing persons reports filed by families across the United States. People who disappeared while working for various government contractors." Maya sat quietly in the corner, still in her flight suit, watching the room's dynamic shift as the magnitude of her discovery became clear. The rescued prisoners were being treated in the medical facility under heavy guard, ostensibly for their protection. But Maya suspected it was as much about controlling information as providing care. "Captain Harrington," Patterson said without looking up from the documents, "you've created a significant problem." "Sir, I've exposed a significant problem. I didn't create it." Patterson's hands trembled slightly as he closed the file. "Do you have any idea what this means?" "What you've uncovered could destabilize intelligence operations across 3 continents." "What I've uncovered," Maya replied evenly, "is evidence that American citizens have been kidnapped, tortured, and murdered by their own government. I'd say that's worth some destabilization." Ramsey stopped pacing and turned to face her. "Captain, you've been out of combat operations for 2 years. You don't understand the complexities of modern intelligence work. Sometimes difficult decisions have to be made for the greater good. Difficult decisions like experimenting on American prisoners, like harvesting organs for VIP transplants." Maya stood up, her exhaustion replaced by anger. "I've read the files, Colonel. There's nothing complex about what was happening in that compound. It was torture, plain and simple." The radio crackled with an incoming transmission. "Base Ox, this is Overwatch. We have multiple aircraft inbound from the north. 8 to 15 minutes. Phillips moved to the communications console. "Roger, Overwatch. Identify aircraft and intentions." "Base Ops, aircraft are showing military transponders but are not responding to our challenges. Be advised, lead aircraft is requesting immediate access to your command structure." Patterson and Ramsey exchanged glances that Maya didn't like. There was something in their expressions, not surprise, but resignation, as if they'd been expecting this. "Sir," Maya said carefully, "who did you contact about this situation?" "Standard protocol requires notification of higher command when classified materials are recovered," Patterson replied, but he wouldn't meet her eyes. Maya felt a chill that had nothing to do with the storm outside. "What exactly did you tell them?" Before Patterson could answer, the command center door burst open. General William Hayes strode in, flanked by 2 men in civilian clothes and a military police escort. The general's uniform was immaculate despite the weather, and his expression was arctic. "Colonel Patterson, I'm here to assume control of this situation." Patterson stood at attention. "Yes, sir. General Hayes, may I present Captain Maya Harrington, the pilot who—" "I know who Captain Harrington is," Hayes interrupted, his eyes fixed on Maya with undisguised hostility. "Captain, you are hereby relieved of duty pending a full investigation into your unauthorized operations." Maya remained seated, which seemed to annoy the general. "Sir, I was conducting a rescue operation for stranded American personnel." "You were conducting an unauthorized assault on a classified facility," one of the civilians said, stepping forward. "I'm Deputy Director Carson from the Defense Intelligence Agency." "Captain Harrington, you are under arrest for violations of the Espionage Act, unauthorized disclosure of classified information, and treason." The words hit the room like a physical blow. Maya felt the walls closing in around her, but she forced herself to remain calm. "On what evidence?" Carson smiled coldly. "On the evidence of your own actions. You infiltrated a classified facility, stole sensitive documents, and compromised ongoing intelligence operations. I rescued American prisoners who were being tortured. You interfered with a legitimate counterintelligence operation designed to root out enemy agents who had infiltrated American operations," Carson replied smoothly. "The individuals you rescued were undergoing enhanced interrogation to determine the extent of their compromise." Maya stared at him in disbelief. "That's a lie. I saw the medical files. Those people were being used for human experimentation." "Captain Harrington," General Hayes said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority, You've been operating under a misconception since the Kandahar incident. Your psychological evaluation after that mission specifically noted paranoid ideation and conspiracy theorizing. What you think you saw tonight was filtered through that psychological instability. Maya felt the familiar sting of having her mental state questioned, but this time she recognized it for what it was, a deliberate attempt to discredit her testimony. General, with respect, I'm not the only witness to what happened tonight. The rescued prisoners can corroborate. The rescued individuals have been debriefed and their statements taken, Carson interrupted. They confirmed that they were being held for legitimate security reasons and that your intervention has compromised ongoing operations. Maya looked around the room, seeing the truth in the faces of Patterson, Phillips, and Ramsey. They'd been told to stand down, to let this play out. The fix was already in. Where's Alpha Team? She asked. Hayes' expression didn't change. Alpha Team was extracted by proper military personnel. They're being debriefed at a secure location. I want to speak with Captain Reeves. That's not possible. Captain Reeves was injured during the extraction and is receiving medical treatment. Maya knew they were lying. Everything about this felt wrong. From the timing of Hayes' arrival to the smooth way, Carson had explanations for every inconvenient fact. Sir, she said, standing to face Hayes directly, I request permission to contact my attorney. You'll have access to legal counsel during the formal proceedings, Carson said. For now, you're being held under emergency security provisions. 2 military police officers moved toward Maya, but she didn't resist. As they placed her in restraints, she looked at Colonel Patterson one last time. Sir, you know this is wrong. You know what I found in that compound. Patterson's face was a mask of conflicted emotions. Captain Harrington, I suggest you cooperate fully with the investigation. It's the only way this ends well for anyone. As the MPs led her toward the door, Maya heard Carson addressing the remaining officers. Gentlemen, everything that occurred here tonight is classified at the highest levels. Any discussion of these events outside official channels will be considered an act of treason. The individuals Captain Harrington brought back have been transferred to appropriate medical facilities, where they can receive proper treatment for their psychological trauma. Maya tried to turn back, tried to say something, but the MPs kept her moving. As they reached the corridor, she heard Hayes' voice one last time. Colonel Patterson, I trust you understand the sensitive nature of this situation. Captain Harrington has been struggling with psychological issues since Kandahar. Tonight's events are clearly the result of those ongoing problems. I'm sure your report will reflect that assessment. The door closed behind her with a finality that sounded like a coffin lid slamming shut. Maya was led through the rain to a waiting vehicle, her mind racing through the implications of what had just happened. They weren't just covering up the compound. They were rewriting the entire narrative, turning her from a rescuer into a mentally unstable pilot who had imagined the whole thing. The prisoners she'd saved would disappear into the system, their testimonies dismissed or discredited. As the vehicle pulled away from the command center, Maya caught a glimpse of the medical facility where the rescued prisoners were supposedly being treated. It was dark, with no signs of the intense medical activity that should have been occurring. If nearly 30 people in critical condition were being cared for, they were already gone, she realized. Transferred to another facility, or worse. Maya closed her eyes and tried to hold on to the memory of what she'd seen in that compound, knowing that her recollection might be the only evidence that it had ever existed. Tomorrow, the official story would be that a psychologically unstable pilot had suffered a breakdown and attacked a legitimate intelligence facility. But tonight, for just a few hours, 27 American prisoners had been free. And somewhere in the electronic maze of classified communications, Maya's thumb drive contained evidence that could still bring down the people responsible, if anyone was brave enough to look for it. The vehicle disappeared into the storm, carrying Maya toward a detention facility where the truth would be buried as deeply as the people who had tried to expose it. But Maya Harrington had learned something important during her years of exile in supply runs and inventory duty. Sometimes the most important battles are fought not with helicopters and weapons, but with patience, planning, and an absolute refusal to let the truth stay buried. The war for justice was just beginning. 3 days after Maya's arrest, Lieutenant Kevin Dawson sat in the base communications center during his overnight shift, staring at a routine maintenance request that had been bothering him since it arrived. The request called for the complete reformatting of all computers in the command center standard procedure after classified data breaches, but the timing felt wrong. Kevin had been thinking about his brother Ryan, supposedly safe with Alpha Team, but unavailable for communication due to operational security. The official story was that Alpha Team had been extracted successfully, but no one had seen them return to base. No debriefings, no medical checks, no contact with families. As the base slept around him, Kevin made a decision that would change everything. He accessed the backup servers that automatically archived all computer activity, systems that most people forgot existed, but the communications technicians, like Kevin, knew intimately. If Captain Harrington had downloaded files from the compound, and if those files had been uploaded to the base network for analysis, they might still exist in the backup archives. What Kevin found in the archive data made his blood run cold. Personnel files for dozens of American citizens listed as deceased or missing. Medical experimentation logs that read like something from a Nazi concentration camp. Financial records showing payments to private contractors for enhanced interrogation services and biological material acquisition. But most damning of all were the communication logs between General Hayes and someone identified only as Prometheus Group, discussions of asset elimination, evidence disposal, and the neutralization of Captain Harrington as a security threat. Kevin copied everything to an encrypted drive, his hands shaking as he realized the magnitude of what he'd discovered. But he also realized that he couldn't handle this alone. He needed help from someone with the authority and connections to make the evidence public. Major Phillips had always seemed like one of the good ones, someone who genuinely cared about his soldiers. Kevin made another decision that felt like stepping off a cliff. At 0300 hours, Phillips was awakened by urgent knocking on his quarters door. When he opened it, he found a terrified communications technician holding a data drive like it was a live grenade. "Sir, I need to show you something. About Captain Harrington. About Alpha Team." Phillips listened in growing horror as Kevin explained what he'd found. The evidence was overwhelming, undeniable, and absolutely damning. But it also put them both in mortal danger. "Kevin, if what you're showing me is accurate, we're looking at a conspiracy that reaches the highest levels of government. Sir, what are we going to do?" Phillips studied the young soldier's face, seeing his own decision reflected there. "We're going to do what Captain Harrington would do. We're going to make sure the truth gets out." The next morning brought a flurry of unusual activity to forward operating Base Echo. Military police units from outside the normal chain of command had arrived during the night, along with intelligence personnel who seemed more interested in confiscating computers than gathering information. Colonel Patterson found himself effectively sidelined in his own command, watching as his base was systematically sanitized by people with higher security clearances and broader authority. "Colonel," Deputy Director Carson approached him with a tablet in hand, "we need your signature on these transfer orders." Patterson reviewed the documents, his expression growing darker with each page. "You're transferring half my staff to other assignments." "On what authority?" "On the authority of national security," Carson replied smoothly. The personnel involved in last night's incident represent potential security risks. They need to be isolated and debriefed, including Major Phillips and Lieutenant Dawson, especially them. They've been exposed to classified information that exceeds their clearance levels. Patterson signed the orders because he had no choice, but as he did, he noticed something odd. The transfer destinations were vague, listing only facility numbers, rather than actual locations. In his 25 years of military service, he'd never seen transfer orders written that way. Meanwhile, in a detention facility 2 hours away, Maya sat in an interrogation room facing Carson and a psychiatrist she didn't recognize. The psychiatrist had been asking the same questions for 3 days, clearly trying to establish a pattern of mental instability. "Captain Harrington, tell me about the voices you heard during the mission." "I didn't hear any voices." "You've claimed that prisoners were asking for help, that you could hear their thoughts." "That's classic auditory hallucination. I heard them speaking with their actual voices, because they were actually there." The psychiatrist made notes on his tablet. "Captain, your resistance to treatment is concerning. The medications we've prescribed should be helping with these episodes." Maya looked at the pill cup they'd been forcing on her 3 times a day. She'd been pretending to take the medication, palming the pills, and disposing of them later. Whatever they were giving her was designed to make her compliant and confused, not to treat any actual mental health condition. "Doctor, I want to speak with a military attorney." "That's not possible until you've been cleared by psychiatric evaluation," Carson interjected. "Captain, the sooner you acknowledge that you experienced a psychological episode, the sooner we can get you the help you need." Maya realized they could keep her here indefinitely, cycling through the same questions and the same demands for her to admit to hallucinations that hadn't happened. Unless someone on the outside was fighting for her, she would disappear into the same system that had swallowed the prisoners from Compound B. That afternoon, Major Phillips made a secure phone call to his former commanding officer, General Patricia Rodriguez, now serving in the Pentagon. Rodriguez had been Phillips' mentor early in his career, and he trusted her integrity absolutely. "General, I have a situation that requires immediate attention. American citizens have been illegally detained and tortured by their own government." "Major, that's a serious accusation. Do you have evidence?" "Yes, ma'am. Conclusive evidence. But I'm operating outside my chain of command because my chain of command appears to be compromised." There was a long pause. "Major Phillips, are you absolutely certain about what you're telling me?" "Yes, ma'am." "And General, there's something else. I believe Captain Maya Harrington is being held illegally to prevent her from testifying about what she discovered. Send me everything you have through encrypted channels. And Major, watch your back. If what you're telling me is true, you're in considerable danger." Rodriguez was true to her word. Within 6 hours of receiving Phillips' evidence package, she had contacted 3 different congressional oversight committees, the FBI's Domestic Terrorism Unit, and the military's Inspector General Office. By the next morning, Forward Operating Base Echo was swarming with investigators from multiple agencies, all demanding access to personnel and records. Deputy Director Carson found himself in the uncomfortable position of having to explain why he couldn't produce the prisoners that Maya had allegedly rescued, or why the satellite imagery of Compound B showed only empty buildings. General Hayes arrived by helicopter that afternoon, his face a mask of barely controlled fury. He went directly to the command center where Colonel Patterson was being interviewed by FBI investigators. "This investigation is being conducted under false pretenses," Hayes announced to the room. "The allegations being made are based on the fantasies of a mentally unstable pilot." Agent Sarah Martinez, the lead FBI investigator, looked up from her notes. "General Hayes, we have physical evidence that contradicts that assessment." We also have communications intercepts that suggest a systematic cover-up of illegal detention activities. Hayes' expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. Agent Martinez, I think you'll find that your evidence has been misinterpreted. National security operations often appear questionable to outside observers who lack the proper context. Sir, we have medical records showing evidence of human experimentation. We have financial records showing payments for services that violate international law. And we have testimony from personnel who witnessed these activities. You have the word of a pilot with documented psychological problems and communications. Technicians who lack the security clearance to understand what they think they saw. Martinez smiled coldly. Actually, General, we have something else. We have Captain Harrington. Hayes went very still. That's impossible. Captain Harrington is receiving psychiatric treatment at a secure medical facility. No, sir, Captain. Harrington was extracted from that facility this morning by federal marshals acting on a court order. She's currently under federal protection and has provided a detailed statement about everything she witnessed. For the first time since Maya had known him, General Hayes looked genuinely rattled. The careful confidence that had carried him through decades of military service cracked just enough to reveal the fear underneath. Where is she? He asked. That's classified, Martinez replied, echoing the phrase that Hayes had used so often to shut down inconvenient questions. As Hayes left the command center under the watchful eyes of federal agents, Maya was indeed in federal custody, but as a protected witness rather than a prisoner. She sat in a secure facility outside Washington, D.C., giving her statement to a panel of investigators who seemed almost as shocked by her revelations as she had been by the events themselves. Captain Harrington, one of the investigators, said, "The evidence you've provided has allowed us to locate 3 additional facilities, similar to the one you infiltrated. We estimate that over 200 American citizens have been illegally detained across these sites." Maya felt a mix of vindication and horror. What about Alpha Team? What about Captain Reeves and his soldiers? The investigator's expression grew grim. We're still working on that, Captain. But I want you to know that your actions have saved lives and exposed corruption at the highest levels of government. As the sun set over Washington, Maya looked out the window of her secure room and thought about Tom Reeves and his soldiers, about the 27 prisoners she'd rescued, and about all the people who were still trapped in a system that valued secrecy over human dignity. The battle was far from over, but for the first time in 3 years, Maya Harrington felt like she was winning. 6 weeks after Maya's rescue from the detention facility, she stood before a joint congressional committee in a hearing room packed with reporters, military officials, and family members of the missing. The formal hearing had been preceded by weeks of closed-door testimony, FBI raids, and the gradual unraveling of what investigators were calling the largest illegal detention operation in American history. General Hayes sat at the witness table next to his attorney, his once immaculate uniform replaced by an expensive civilian suit. His military career was over, along with those of 17 other officers implicated in what the media had dubbed Operation Dark Harbor. Deputy Director Carson had disappeared entirely, reportedly fleeing to a non-extradition country with classified documents and several $1 million in offshore accounts. The manhunt for him was international in scope and growing more intense by the day. Captain Harrington, Congressman Michael Harrison, the committee chairman, addressed Maya from the elevated dais. You've provided this committee with detailed testimony about your experiences on the night of March 15th. Can you summarize for the record what you discovered at the facility designated as Compound B? Maya leaned toward the microphone, her voice steady despite the magnitude of the moment. Congressman Harrison, I discovered 27 American citizens being held in conditions that can only be described as torture. These individuals included military personnel reported as MIA, civilian contractors who had asked uncomfortable questions about missing colleagues, and family members whose only crime was looking for their missing relatives. And what was being done to these individuals? Maya took a breath, remembering the horrors she'd witnessed. They were being subjected to medical experimentation, psychological torture, and in some cases, surgical procedures designed to harvest organs for transplant to high-value individuals. A murmur ran through the packed hearing room. Despite weeks of leaks and media coverage, hearing the details in Maya's calm, professional voice still had the power to shock. Congressman Harrison continued, "Captain, you've also testified that this facility was part of a larger network. Can you elaborate on that?" "Yes, sir. The evidence I recovered included communications logs and financial records indicating similar facilities in 6 countries, with a total of at least 200 American detainees. And who was responsible for this operation?" Maya's eyes found General Hayes in the audience. "The evidence indicates that the operation was run by a coalition of military officers, intelligence officials, and private contractors, with oversight from individuals at the highest levels of government." The hearing continued for 6 hours, with Maya facing questions from both sympathetic and hostile committee members. Some tried to portray her as a rogue pilot with psychological problems, but the physical evidence was overwhelming. The rescued prisoners had been found and were providing corroborating testimony. The financial records showed millions of dollars in illegal payments. The medical records documented atrocities that violated every international law and human rights convention. During a break, Maya stepped outside the hearing room and was approached by a man she recognized as David Hamilton, brother of Captain Derek Hamilton, one of the pilots she'd rescued from Compound B. "Captain Harrington, I wanted to thank you," Hamilton said, his voice thick with emotion. "My brother was reported killed in action 3 years ago. We buried an empty coffin. When you brought him home, he couldn't finish the sentence." Maya clasped his shoulder. "How's he doing?" "Better. The physical injuries are healing. The psychological trauma." Hamilton shook his head. "It's going to take time. But he's alive, and he's home. And that's because of you." Similar scenes played out throughout the day as Maya was approached by family members of the rescued prisoners. Each conversation reinforced her conviction that the risks she'd taken had been worth it. That evening, Maya sat in a secure hotel room with Agent Martinez, reviewing the day's testimony and preparing for tomorrow's continuation of the hearing. "Captain, there's something I need to tell you," Martinez said, her expression serious. "We found Alpha Team." Maya's heart stopped. "Where?" "They were being held at a facility in Romania. All 23 soldiers, including Captain Reeves. They're alive, but..." Martinez paused. "They were being used as test subjects for experimental interrogation techniques." Maya felt a mix of relief and rage that left her trembling. "When will they be brought home?" "They're already en route. Should arrive at Walter Reed tomorrow morning. I want to see them." "That can be arranged. But Captain, you should know that they've been through hell. They're going to need time to recover." Maya nodded, understanding. The important thing was that they were alive and coming home. The next morning brought dramatic developments. As Maya prepared to resume her testimony, news broke that Deputy Director Carson had been captured in Switzerland, arrested while trying to access a bank account containing $40 million in illegal payments. More significantly, the FBI had raided a facility in Northern Virginia and discovered evidence that Operation Dark Harbor had been planning to expand beyond American citizens. Documents found at the site indicated plans to begin kidnapping foreign nationals for experimentation, including children from allied countries. When the hearing resumed, the atmosphere had changed dramatically. Even the most skeptical committee members seemed stunned by the scope of the conspiracy. General Hayes was called to testify under oath, but he invoked his Fifth Amendment rights and refused to answer any questions. His lawyer read a brief statement claiming that Hayes had been following orders from civilian authorities and had believed all operations were legal. The statement fooled no one. Communications intercepts had already shown Hayes coordinating directly with Carson and other conspirators, often bypassing or deliberately misleading his civilian superiors. As the hearing entered its final phase, Congressman Harrison asked Maya the question that everyone wanted answered. Captain Harrington, knowing what you know now about the risks you faced and the powerful forces arrayed against you, would you make the same decision again? Maya thought about Tom Reeves and his soldiers suffering in a Romanian detention facility. She thought about Derek Hamilton and the 26 other prisoners whose lives she'd saved. She thought about the 200 other American citizens who were still being located and rescued because of the evidence she'd provided. Congressman, I took an oath to defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. The people running Operation Dark Harbor were domestic enemies of the worst kind. They were using the power of the American government to torture and murder American citizens. So yes, sir, I would make the same decision again. And I would make it without hesitation. The hearing room erupted in applause that took several minutes to quiet. When order was restored, Congressman Harrison delivered his closing statement. Captain Harrington, this committee finds that your actions, while technically outside normal military protocol, were not only justified but heroic. You have exposed a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of government and saved hundreds of American lives. The American people owe you a debt of gratitude that can never be fully repaid. As the hearing concluded, Maya felt a hand on her shoulder. She turned to see Colonel Patterson, who had testified earlier about the pressure he'd faced to cover up Maya's discoveries. Captain, I owe you an apology. I should have supported you from the beginning. Maya studied his face, seeing genuine remorse there. Colonel, you were in an impossible situation. The important thing is that the truth came out. Thanks to you. And Captain, your flight status has been fully restored. In fact, you're being promoted to Major and reassigned to a new unit that's being created to investigate and prevent future incidents like this. Maya felt a smile cross her face for the first time in weeks. Sir, I'd be honored to serve. As she left the hearing room, Maya was surrounded by reporters shouting questions. But she moved through them without stopping. Outside, she found Agent Martinez waiting with a car. Ready to go see Alpha Team? Martinez asked. Maya nodded, climbing into the passenger seat. As they drove toward Walter Reed Medical Center, she thought about the long road that had led to this moment, from Kandahar to the supply hangar, from the storm-lashed mountains of Afghanistan to the halls of Congress. She had lost everything once, had been broken down and cast aside by a system that valued obedience over justice. But she had rebuilt herself, had found the strength to fight back, and had ultimately won a victory that would protect countless future victims. Some things, Maya reflected as the medical center came into view, you don't leave behind. And some battles are worth fighting, no matter what they cost. 2 months after the congressional hearings, Major Maya Harrington stood on the tarmac at Joint Base Andrews, watching as a medical transport aircraft touched down in the golden light of a Washington morning. The plane carried the last group of American prisoners recovered from Operation Dark Harbor facilities, 17 individuals who had been found at a black site in Eastern Europe. The operation to locate and rescue the scattered prisoners had become an international effort, with American special forces working alongside foreign intelligence agencies to shut down the entire network. Maya had played a key role in the operation, using her knowledge of the original compound's layout and procedures to help plan the raids. As the aircraft's doors opened and the rescued prisoners were carefully brought down on stretchers, Maya felt a familiar tightness in her chest. Some faces she recognized from the intelligence files. Others were strangers whose only crime had been asking the wrong questions or trusting the wrong people. Major Harrington. The voice behind her belonged to General Patricia Rodriguez, who had been promoted to head the new Joint Task Force on Illegal Detention. I wanted to personally thank you for your work on the Prague facility raid. Maya turned and saluted. Just doing my job, General. Rodriguez smiled. Maya, I think we both know this goes far beyond just doing your job. The intelligence you provided helped us locate facilities we never would have found otherwise. 37 more Americans are going home because of you. As they spoke, Maya noticed a familiar figure being wheeled from the aircraft. Captain Derek Hamilton, the pilot she'd rescued from the original compound, was now serving as a liaison between the task force and the recovered prisoners. His physical injuries had healed, but Maya could see the lingering effects of his ordeal. In the careful way he moved and the hypervigilance that never quite left his eyes. Derek, Maya called out, walking over to greet him. Maya. His face broke into a genuine smile. Good to see you. How are you adjusting to your new assignment? Better than I expected. Turns out there's a lot of satisfaction in shutting down the kind of people who ran these operations. Derek nodded, his expression growing serious. Any word on Carson's trial? Jury selection starts next month. The prosecutors are confident they have enough evidence to put him away for life. And Hayes? Maya's expression darkened. He's cooperating with investigators, providing information about other officials who were involved. In exchange, he's looking at 25 years instead of life without parole. Derek was quiet for a moment. Sometimes I wonder if justice is really being served. These people destroyed so many lives. Justice isn't just about punishment. Maya replied, It's about making sure this never happens again. Every facility we shut down, every prisoner we bring home, every corrupt official we expose, that's justice too. They were interrupted by a commotion near the medical transport. One of the rescued prisoners, a young woman who looked to be in her early 20s, was refusing to get on the stretcher and was demanding to speak with the pilot who had rescued the first group. Maya approached slowly, recognizing the signs of trauma-induced hypervigilance. The woman's eyes were darting between the medical personnel and the vehicles, looking for escape routes or threats. Hi, Maya said gently, stopping several feet away. I'm Maya Harrington. I understand you wanted to speak with me? The woman studied her face intently. You're the pilot. The one who got the others out of Compound B. That's right. My name is Jennifer Walsh. I've been missing for 14 months. My family thinks I'm dead. Her voice broke slightly. I need to know, are they safe? The people who took me, they said if I ever escaped, they would hurt my family. Maya felt her heart clench. This was the part of recovery that the congressional hearings and media coverage rarely addressed. The ongoing terror that the victims lived with. The fear that their rescue might bring retaliation against their loved ones. Jennifer, the people who took you are either dead or in federal custody. The entire organization has been dismantled. Your family is safe, and they're waiting for you. You're sure? I'm sure, and I'm going to personally make sure you get home safely. Jennifer's shoulders sagged with relief, and she allowed the medical personnel to help her onto a stretcher. As she was being loaded into an ambulance, she caught Maya's hand. Thank you for everything. Maya squeezed her hand gently. Thank you for surviving, for not giving up hope. As the ambulance pulled away, Maya was approached by a young man in an army uniform. It took her a moment to recognize Private First Class Kevin Dawson, the young soldier whose unit patch she had carried into battle. Major Harrington, I'm Kevin Dawson. Kevin, how's your brother? Kevin's face lit up. He's good, man. Really? Good. He's back with his unit and doing well. He wanted me to give you this. He handed her a small wooden plaque with the Alpha Team insignia carved into it. He made it himself. Said to tell you that Alpha Team doesn't forget its friends. Maya accepted the plaque, feeling the weight of the carved wood and the deeper weight of friendship and loyalty it represented. How is Captain Reeves? Tom's doing well too. He's been promoted to major and is working with the task force to help other recovered prisoners adjust to coming home. Kevin hesitated. Ma'am, there's something else. The whole team wanted you. To know what you did that night, it wasn't just about rescuing us. It was about proving that some things are worth fighting for, even when everyone tells you it's impossible. Maya felt tears prick in her eyes. Your brother and the rest of Alpha Team proved that too. They held their position when anyone else would have surrendered. Yes, ma'am. But you came back for us, even when it meant sacrificing your career. Your freedom, everything. That's something special. As Kevin walked away, Maya reflected on how much had changed since that storm-lashed night in Afghanistan. The official investigation had exonerated her completely, acknowledging that her actions had been not only justified but heroic. Her military record had been amended to reflect her true service, including the classified operations that had been hidden to protect intelligence sources. More importantly, the broader investigation had led to systematic reforms in military detention procedures, new oversight mechanisms for intelligence operations, and the creation of an independent body to investigate allegations of abuse. Maya's ordeal had resulted in changes that would protect future victims and prevent the kind of systematic abuse that had characterized Operation Dark Harbor. Major Harrington. General Rodriguez approached again, this time carrying a folder. I have your next assignment. Maya opened the folder and reviewed the briefing documents. Somalia? We've received credible intelligence about another facility, this one holding foreign nationals, but operated with American equipment and funding. The State Department wants it shut down quietly, without international incident. Maya studied the satellite imagery and operational details. It was a complex mission that would require careful planning and precise execution, exactly the kind of challenge she had been hoping for. When do I leave? Next week. You'll be leading a joint task force of special operations personnel and intelligence specialists. Rodriguez paused. Maya, I want you to know that you have complete authority on this operation. No one will override your decisions or question your judgment. After everything you've been through, you've earned that. Trust. Maya closed the folder and looked across the tarmac, where the last of the rescued prisoners were being loaded into vehicles for transport to medical facilities and reunions with families. In the distance, she could see the Washington Monument, rising against the blue sky, a symbol of the principles she had sworn to defend. General, I won't let you down. I know you won't. But Maya, remember, you're not doing this alone anymore. You have a team, you have support, and you have people who believe in you. The days of flying solo into impossible situations are over. Maya smiled, thinking about her new unit and the dedicated personnel who had volunteered to work on the most difficult and dangerous missions. Actually, General, I think the best missions are the ones where you're not flying solo, where you're part of something bigger than yourself. As the sun climbed higher in the Washington sky, Maya made her way to her car for the drive back to her apartment. Tonight, she would have dinner with Tom Reeves and several other Alpha Team members, a monthly tradition they had established to maintain their bonds and support each other through the ongoing challenges of readjustment. Tomorrow, she would begin planning her next mission, another chance to bring American citizens home and shut down those who preyed on the innocent. But for now, Maya Harrington was simply a soldier who had kept her promise. She had not left anyone behind. She had fought for justice when it seemed impossible. And she had proven that sometimes the most important battles are won not with superior firepower or advanced technology, but with the simple determination to do what's right, regardless of the cost. The old Black Hawk that had carried her through that storm-lashed night had been retired to a museum, where a plaque told the story of an impossible rescue mission that had saved hundreds of lives and exposed corruption at the highest levels of government. Visitors to the museum often ask guides how one pilot in an obsolete helicopter had succeeded where modern aircraft had failed. The answer was simple, though not easy. Maya Harrington had refused to accept that some people were worth leaving behind. In a world that often valued expedience over principle, she had chosen principle. In a system that rewarded obedience over justice, she had chosen justice. And in doing so, she had reminded everyone around her that the most important battles are not the ones that advance careers or protect institutions, but the ones that protect the innocent and defend the truth. Some things Maya had learned, you don't leave behind. And some fights are worth having, no matter how impossible they seem. As her car pulled away from Joint Base Andrews, Major Maya Harrington looked forward to her next mission, her next chance to prove that impossible was just another word for a challenge that required extraordinary courage. The storm had passed, but the pilot who had flown through it remained, ready for whatever came next. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and become a part of our Everyday Life Stories community. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below. We love hearing from our amazing viewers around the world.